Welcome to Lantern Voices, a podcast by Lantern Publishing and Media.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Lantern Voices, a podcast by Lantern Publishing and Media. My name is Louisa and I will be your host today for this episode with Carey Theil and Christine Dorchak. They are responsible for the organization GREY2KUSA Worldwide, and they are the authors of one of our greatest hits here at Lantern, the book Brooklyn Goes Home. Brooklyn Goes Home tells the story of GREY2KUSA Worldwide and the fight to end Greyhound racing. But it is also a memoir about the lives of Carey and Christine and Brooklyn's life. Brooklyn was a Greyhound who was born in Australia and then shipped to Macau to spend his life and die on the racetracks. But thanks to the work of GREY2KUSA Worldwide, he and all of his other pals at the canidrome were rescued. Brooklyn ended up going and live with Carey and Christine for the last remaining years of his life, and we chatted about that as well here in the podcast today. If you haven't read the book yet, I strongly recommend the read. It is one of my personal favorites here at Lantern, and mostly because I think it was, if not the first book that I've read here, it was one of the first books that I've read when I started working for Lantern, because it was one of the main releases for that year. And it is very touching and very heartwarming. It brought me to tears at the end. Usually a good book is the one that makes you cry. But for a good reason. And it is a very inspiring story. It is a story of fight and an activism fight that was able to connect people from different mindsets, from different political opinions towards the same goal, which nowadays is very, very hard. As per usual, if you stay with us until the end of the conversation, until the end of the episode, we're going to give you a coupon, a 25% off coupon to use on Brooklyn Goes Home or any other book ever featured here in the podcast at our ebook store. We unfortunately can't control audiobooks or physical books because we sell them through distributors and our partners. But our ebook store is managed by ourselves here at Lantern, so we are more than happy to offer you all listeners a 25% off coupon if you heard a conversation and now you want to read a book, because that's what happens with me when I am listening to podcasts about books. Usually I want to read the book next. This conversation was very nice and very inspiring. I think you guys are going to love Carey and Christine. And stick with us until the end of the episode then to get the coupon and get some extra news about Lantern firsthand. All right, let's get Carey and Christine in. Welcome to Lantern Voices. It is a pleasure to have you both here, Carey and Christine.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, we're honored to participate.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. And thank you for joining us in conversation about, I think, what is one of the most awarded books that we have at Lantern, Brooklyn Goes Home. And it's one of my personal favorites. I think it was the first one that I actually read the whole thing when I started at Lantern. And it got me in tears in the end. So congratulations for such an amazing book.
That's a wonderful compliment. Thank you so much. Our book it's meant for dog lovers, but it's really meant for anyone who wants to find a way to make change in this world. So we're hoping that it reaches a broader audiences beyond just animal advocates like ourselves.
Absolutely. And to start off, I would like to start with introductions. Since this is a book that talks a lot about your trajectory and the trajectory of the organization you're representing, GREY2KUSA Worldwide, I would like you to tell our readers and our listeners, since this is the podcast, what sparked your trajectory in the animal rights movement, your interests, and all the way up until GREY2KUSA came to be.
Yeah, so my mother was the president of a small animal rights group in Portland, Oregon, and also was a dog rescuer. So we constantly had many dogs in our house coming and going that she would temporarily foster and find homes for. And so it was always a part of my life. um, I was actually, as a very young man, cynical about being able to make change in the political process, which is ironic. But there was a grassroots movement that preceded our work to end greyhound racing, and uh, that early movement won some key victories, but really wasn't didn't have resources and really wasn't ready for a big fight against the greyhound racing industry. But it did culminate in a ballot question, which went on the ballot in the year 2000 in Massachusetts to end greyhound racing in the Bay State, which was sort of the first moment that the greyhound industry, really anywhere in the world, had faced any kind of significant opposition. And so, uh, I think Christine will talk more about that in her background. But I was I had been doing citizen lobbying in the Oregon legislature on a number of animal welfare issues, and I someone who was working on the Greyhound campaign, actually Susan Netboy with the Greyhound Protection League, who was sort of the leader of this Greyhound grassroots movement, told me about the Massachusetts ballot question and asked me to come out and work on it. And so, as a 22-year-old kid, basically, I came out to be the campaign spokesperson. So that's how I came to this fight.
Just like Carrie, I had a mother who made great impressions on me about animals and caring for animals in nature. And that was all well and good. I was still being raised to kind of be a successful person. And by successful, meaning make a lot of money, make your family proud, have a big house, you know, etc. But everything got derailed, but for the better in 1992. My personal calling to greyhound gambling actually was prompted by a near fatal accident that I had that year. While walking my dog Kelsey, I was run down by a speeding train, and yet somehow we survived. And when I woke up from my coma, I realized that my dog had saved my life, and I knew I had a debt to pay. I decided if I could walk and talk and be myself again, which was not likely. Um, I was in very bad condition, not just physically, but mentally. I had severe head injuries to recover from, and it took years to recover. But I said if I could ever get up and be an independent person again, I would dedicate my life to helping dogs. Now, I didn't know how I was gonna do that, but I knew I had a debt to pay, and I was very sure of that. So, a few years later, um, when I was finally, back on my feet, literally, I found out that there were 2,000 dogs that were suffering just a few miles away from where I lived. I had a small apartment in Boston, and these dogs were being used for racing, exploited, and then killed when they weren't making enough money, and I just thought it was horrendous. I'd never heard of dog racing ever. I'm from New Jersey. We don't have dog racing, but here in Massachusetts, it was one of the top states for dog racing. I learned that there was a problem. I said, "I think this is it. I think this is what I'm supposed to work on to help dogs." And one thing led to another, and as Carrie mentioned, I became a volunteer for the first campaign, statewide campaign to outlaw dog racing, and I was the lead signature gatherer, and I was all in, and I put everything I could into this fight, but, unfortunately, we lost. We lost 51-49 on the ballot that year. That was the year 2000.
And from what you said in the book, that was the goal. That's why grade 2K is in 2000.
Right.
So the goal was to end dog racing until the year 2000. But
That's right. We were very sure of ourselves.
it should be, yes. That didn't happen. You didn't stop fighting, which is more important, I think. Because, and especially I think in today's world when we keep being bombarded by bad news everywhere and from more sources than 20, 30 years ago, it is even more important to keep fighting, even though when we have to face some setbacks sometimes. And that's what you guys did.
One of our early mentors was an anti-gambling activist named Tom Gray, who is sort of the preeminent anti-gambling activist of his time, and he was amazing. He had traveled around the country with no resources at all, essentially, working out of the back of a car or sometimes even just like staying in people's houses, fighting the casino industry and winning a lot of those fights against so
Impossible
much
odds.
resources, impossible odds, right? So many resources on the other side. And one thing Tom said to us is stay on the field, and you know the fight itself is, all the answers are in the fight itself. And as we started to work, we formed a national nonprofit, and we started to work in all of these states and started to, honestly, in those early years, we lost a lot. The TED Talk we did, we have a whole riff on how, we lost here and lost there. And because we did sort of lose and lose and lose, but, slowly we did start to find a method of doing this work. And the fight itself, the struggle itself was our best teacher, ironically, along with the industry, along with, this abusive industry. Those were really our best teachers. But we learned a bunch of things that were counterintuitive. And one of the things that's really counterintuitive, that was very unexpected to us, is sometimes victory is defeat and vice versa. Truly, if we had won that first ballot question in Massachusetts, then I think all of the work that came after wouldn't have happened. And as heartbreaking as it was to lose 51-49, and understand that when we lost, on that day in November of 2000, we knew that because of our failure, a huge number of dogs are going to suffer and die. Not only were greyhounds going to continue to live in cages, but a lot of dogs were going to die because essentially of our failure. And that's something you have to face and live with, and it's very difficult. But you know, looking back on it, I now know that ironically, the path forward was only through a loss. And that has continued over the years. I mean, it's been it's been amazing how a lot of the times when I think we're gonna win a fight, we lose, and then we unexpectedly win when we don't expect to. There really is this, it's like the fight itself has a life of its own. And rather than trying to impose your will on it, or guide it in the way that you would like it to go, I think it's good to approach that with some humility and say, I'm going to keep fighting for dogs. I'm going to keep struggling. I'm going to keep, yes, you need to be strategic and think ahead, and try to move this in the right direction the best way you can. But just continuing to fight and engage and having faith, that there is something, deeper here at work, is what we've come to over the years.
Yeah, I think the strategies that we used, which were to seek incremental change, uh, we did this and we stayed grounded on our mission. And these are the key things that we would express to others who want to make change in the world as well. The dogs guided us. Whenever I have a decision I need to make about a strategy or the next move, I say, what would the dogs want? And when we lost 51-49 in 2000, just said to myself, the dogs want us to keep fighting. They don't know the difference between election day and the next day. They're still waiting. So instead of listening to people who said, "Oh, you're losers. You don't know what you're doing," and believe me, there were a lot of them who told us to give up. I said, "No, no. I want to start again, and not just end dog racing in Massachusetts, end it everywhere." And at that point, everywhere meant nationwide. But now we work internationally, we work worldwide. So we've allies around the globe who are fighting against the cruelty of greyhound racing, and it all started in a one-room basement office in Somerville, Massachusetts.
No,
So
I think one takeaway from our work is, I do think we prove that, in this broken world where it feels like nothing can get better, and it feels like our democracy is completely broken and doesn't work at all. Um, it is very much still possible to make transformational change, but it's a difficult process. It takes years. It takes commitment, and you're gonna have to go through a lot of losses to get there.
Mhm.
And you have to open your heart to working with everybody who wants to help. And this means along the way, we've worked with people from completely opposite points of view, Democrat and Republican, young and old, Northern and Southern, who have different views on any multitude of issues. But what they agreed on was that dog racing was cruel and inhumane and had to end. So we have found allies across the board, and they're all united in this one principle. We have to help dogs. And that's the simplicity of our message, I think, is what has really carried us through all these years.
The Main Street Vegan podcast, hosted by Lantern author and vegan OG Victoria Moran, is a highly regarded long-running show nearing its 600th episode. With a tagline, vitality, spirituality, compassion, and the high rating of 4.85 on Apple Podcasts, Main Street Vegan was ranked by USA Today among the 10 best vegan podcasts. Listen on Apple or Spotify, or watch on YouTube at Victoria Moran Official. It's hard nowadays, or perhaps for many years, it has been hard to put two polarizing opposites in conversation towards a common good. So it's great to see that this organization and others around there are able to do that very Herculean task.
The dogs create a safe space for people to agree on something that is just so basic. It's common sense and compassion, because not only is this industry cruel and inhumane, but it costs host states money and host countries money. Here in the United States, the last state with dog racing is West Virginia, and it subsidizes dog racing with as much as $22 million a year. This is one of the poorest states in our country, and yet money is being wasted to give handouts to greyhound breeders to keep a losing business afloat. It makes no sense economically, and it makes no sense from just basic humanity and concern for, just decency. So to me, this is really a cops and robbers story, good guys and bad guys. And I'm very motivated to keep fighting. And I'm very proud that our fight in the United States, particularly our fight that extended to closing the only legal dog track in China, has prompted worldwide response, and groups formed around the world after our Macau campaign succeeded, because it was so inspirational that this very isolated track on Macau, which is, off the mainland of China, if that track could be closed, any track could be closed. And more than that, even the dogs could be saved. When we first learned about the canidrome in Macau, we learned that 400 dogs were shipped there every year from Australia to race and die. There was no adoption program, and it was horrendous. It was the worst dog track in the world, and we committed to closing the track and rescuing the dogs. And many people scoffed at this and said, "Oh, even if you close the track, they're just gonna kill all the dogs." Well, that is not what happened. We negotiated with the government. It was the government that ordered the canidrome to close. We started in 2011, and by 2018, the government agreed with us and said, "This place must close, and we are going to help you to airlift these dogs to waiting rescue groups around the world." So we had a network formed of willing people and advocates and groups that received the dogs, and so many of them are actually still alive today, and we get reports about them, and that really keeps us, motivated to keep working, because we see the happy endings that result.
Mm-hmm. And I think you've seen around, like throughout your time working with this project and working for this cause, that many people end up embracing it for different reasons. In your book, one of the things that touched me the most was whenever you bring somebody new to the story, you mention how the fight became important for them. and it is in a very different way for everybody. Of course, as you mentioned, like dogs unite people. So many people had good memories with their childhood dogs, or they just feel affection for dogs and cats because they are what we consider companion animals. So it is a way to bring people together towards a common cause. In your opinion, what is the most effective ways to move people to fight for the animals?
It's a great question. Yeah, I mean, you're so right. I mean, one story that I tell, and it is in the book is, you know, there's a lawmaker in Florida named John Tobiah. He was, you know, kind of a unusual lawmaker, not as standard. I mean, he's viewed as a little quirky by his colleagues, and he called me into his office one day, and I didn't know why he would wanted to talk to me, and he sat me down and he said, "I called you in because I want to tell you why I support your work to end greyhound racing." And I was like, "Okay, like where is this going?" And he said, "When I go home and tell my daughter that I'm fighting for greyhounds, she thinks I'm a better person than I really am." And that was such a strange thing for him to tell me, but it was also, revelatory because I do think that, you know, the lawmakers that work with us and fight for us, you know, this isn't necessarily a big voting issue compared to other issues. We're not a huge campaign contributor to them. Um, they do it just because it's the right thing to do, and I think there's a lot of lawmakers that honestly probably don't have a great experience as a lawmaker. Like, they're dealing with a lot of just, you know, nonsense and a lot of toxic it's just, you know, eh, I have a lot of respect for people who serve, because of that. I just think it's not a fun thing to do in a lot of situations. And so, you know, to get an opportunity to work on something that's genuinely the right thing to do, this is genuinely good, um, I think gives them something that is very powerful, and we've seen that even with the people that work for us here at GREY2KUSA. I mean, that sense of mission, is very powerful and very beautiful, and you know, even so much, we've had lawmakers, quite a few lawmakers, Peter Courtney in the state of Oregon, who is this legendary lawmaker, maybe the most legendary lawmaker in in the history of the state. Then Sheila Roberge in New Hampshire. Peter was a Democrat, Sheila was a Republican. And Sheila was in the Senate for decades, and both of them, uh, essentially, you know, one of the final bills they worked on was this issue. With Peter Courtney, it was his last floor speech, and literally the Senate, passed his bill unanimously, not only because it was the right thing to do, but as a way to honor him. And so I think that that really does go to how special this issue is. There's just these are such sweet, gentle dogs, and they've gone through so much suffering. There is something very pure and unique and special, and I think that's true of all these animal issues. I mean, I think this is one of the great movements and great causes of our time. And so, uh, I think for me, if you just stay focused on the mission and you know you have strong boundaries in terms of the way you approach this work, and you know just continue pushing forward, um, people will be attracted to it. They will. I mean, I don't know that you necessarily have to, you know, I don't know there's like a special strategy to go out and recruit. It's more of a stone soup, you know? It's like this work is to me this work is an invitation. Uh in the same way that the greyhound racing industry and other animal abuse industries constantly give people choices to do the right thing or not do the right thing, to harm an animal or save an animal, to speak out against cruelty or stay silent against cruelty. Um, I think that our work is an invitation, and as an invitation that's open to everyone, whether you are, you know, AOC or President Trump and everyone in between. this work is an invitation. It's an invitation to, despite all these other issues, despite everything else that's going on in the world, you have an opportunity to do the right thing on an issue that will help dogs. And that, approaching the work in that way, that you're trying to make something that's bigger than yourself, that's an invitation to everyone in our community, um, is very powerful. I think there's a lot of groups that try to there's others that approach it in a different way, but that's how we try to do it.
Mhm. Our approach is quite different as an organization. We're trying to put ourselves out of business. And that approach really, again, guides every decision we make. So we're not here to promote ourselves. We continue to work in a one-room office. That's why, you know, Carrie and I, when we do interviews, we have to make sure that the sound system is going to work because there's sometimes some echoes because we're in this one room basement, not one of them, not in the basement anymore, but in a one room office. So we've kept it real simple and really logical and straightforward. And I think that has attracted people to help us because, we're definitely David in this fight. David versus Goliath. There's no doubt about it. In 1992, when I got run down by that train, there were 70 dog tracks and $3.5 billion bet on dog racing in the United States. And yet a few years later, Carrie and I stood up and said, "Well, yeah, we can take that down." So that's chutzpah or craziness or I don't know what, but we said we were gonna try because no one else was. And that's kind of like that's how we feel about things. These dogs needed help. We were gonna try to help them. We didn't know if we were gonna succeed, and what we found, as Carrie, said, was sometimes we one of the things we had to do was fail in order to succeed. Sometimes failure opened up greater possibilities, for success, and it's just been like that. It's not easy, quite frankly, to lose, but every time you lose, you just get up again, and you keep fighting, and it's extremely rewarding to be doing this work because I know that when we do succeed, thousands of dogs are helped because that's a dog track to operate. One track takes about 1,000 dogs. So we know not only will those dogs be saved, but all sorts of dogs, on breeding farms who would otherwise race, they're gonna have to be, placed. It's gonna be this, avalanche of humane change every time a dog track is closed. So when that happens, it's a huge moment for us, and it is so thrilling, to see our work take effect.
Of all the animal abuse industries, I do think the greyhound industry was one of the most politically savvy. Um, I mean, this was an industry that became incredibly powerful in Congress, but even more so in these state legislatures. I mean, there was a time when the greyhound racing industry was literally the most powerful special interest of all in many of these states, because it kept having to go back to the legislature to get tax breaks and subsidies and new forms of gambling, and so it really became almost like an animal abuse industry second and a political lobbying entity first, and because of that, for us to succeed, I do think we had to go deeper into the political process and the legislative process than the animal rights movement generally has to go. Um, and I mean, in that way, again, I think the industry was an incredible teacher for us because it forced us to adapt and to learn this process. Uh, in a way that I would like to think our movement can learn from. And so I think for the rest of the movement, I would look at I, I've said before, I think the Greyhound fight is important because it's the only place in the animal movement where we're taking on a politically powerful, culturally significant, uh, you know, animal abuse industry seeking to completely abolish it, not just reform it and winning. I don't know there's another place in the movement that's like that. that we can, there's a few you can discuss as possibilities, but I think it's the clearest example of that. And I hope the rest of the animal movement looks at the Greyhound fight and sits with why is that the case? And I think one of the reasons is that the industry was so politically sophisticated and so powerful that we had to change and adapt as a response to that.
Mhm. At Lantern Publishing and Media, we love working with authors who are deeply aligned with causes that matter. Many of them are passionate about animals. One of those authors is Cheryl Moss. Lantern is proud to have published 3 of Cheryl's children's books, Gabriel, Cluck, and Pickle. Each story highlights an animal who escaped factory farming and found safety and care at a sanctuary. Cheryl is committed to shining a spotlight on the plight of animals. Not only does she do that by writing her books and sharing her books, she also does it as the host of the Better Life for Animals podcast. If you care about animals and want to hear real stories from sanctuary founders, team members, board members, and volunteers, be sure to tune in. Several Lantern authors have been on the show, so you might encounter some familiar voices out there. Visit betterlifeforanimals.com/podcast to start listening. Again, that's betterlifeforanimals.com/podcast. I said that the book was one of the first ones I read when I started at Lantern, and I had to reread it again now to prepare the script for this episode. So after I was done with the second read through, I went to Google and I just decided to Google like Greyhound racing, dog racing in the world in the US. And the little AI summary that they offer now in the beginning, they were saying it was a very powerful industry up until the mid 2000s, early 2010s, and now it's in rapidly decline. So I was like, well, yes, that's exactly what the book says. And now I know why. I know who was behind all that.
Well, it's very kind of you to say. I mean, it wasn't, again, we're very honored to have done this work. It's the greatest honor of our life. But it wasn't us. It was us and, you know, a lot of other people like you talk about in the book. I mean, we intentionally wanted to tell all those stories because that's the truth of what happened. It was a large and still is a large movement on behalf that comprises a lot of people, and politicians that agree on absolutely nothing else.
Right now, we have a federal bill in Congress, and it's a bipartisan bill. And you don't see this a lot in Congress right now. So, we have uh, 2 co sponsors who probably don't agree on much else, the 2 key co sponsors, and yet they agree on this and they're fighting for this. And it's just such a proud moment for us because we're breaking through. And I think what I learned as a young activist who I did all the protesting and letter writing and press releases and everything, stunts, whatever it was, I to get attention on the plight of animals. It was when I realized that we had to do more than just reach hearts and minds. We actually had to change the law to help animals, and that was a huge moment for me, a real revelation because um, I realized that the greyhounds needed a lawyer, and that's why I went to law school, and when I went to law school, there were very few animal law programs. There was none I could take here, so I had to create my own program, but now, because there's such recognition in our movement that we need to change the law to help animals, there are animal law programs all over the country now, and it's in my lifetime, there's been such a great evolution, towards realizing this concept that, animals are political entities and we need to fight for them because the laws right now are written against them from the very beginning, calling them property. That that is a key problem. It's very hard to fight for adequate protections when you're protecting a thing and not a person. So these are, bigger questions than can be answered by us today or that we can solve. But we're trying to use the Greyhounds to show that working in the political process, changing the laws, making good laws, and abolishing bad laws really sets a clear path to helping these dogs, even if the law continues to call them property.
We were talking a lot about how to coordinate polarizing opposites, but in the book, you also bring examples of coordinating like minded people. So, folks who are aligned with the same mission, but the way that they act towards it is a little bit different. Some folks believe more in education, others believe in protesting in the streets, others believe that more active actions, not to say violence, but like to be more hands-on and
Direct action, yeah.
yes, will be more effective. Others want to work behind the scenes. And activism allows all of that. Activism
Yeah.
allows different personalities to work together. But sometimes managing this, especially when you have a common enemy to fight who will handpick the examples that they know that will be easier for them to market outside as, "See, they are bad people." Um, they're out there and they're just waiting for somebody to step in a direction that will be easier for them to pick and just use it as an example. So, when you were coordinating such a big movement with so many people, do you have any advice for other folks who are doing similar work and who have to coordinate all this multitude of personalities toward the same goal?
That's completely normal. I mean, there's never been a social justice movement in the history of social justice movements that didn't have infighting and disagreements, and I mean, we're human beings, that's who we are. So, I think that for me, it's, just take every situation as they come, do your best with every situation, try to give yourself a little bit of grace because honestly, none of us are perfect. None of us are going to handle every situation exactly right. Um, Try to be respectful of other activists and other approaches, even if even if it's not the approach that you would try. But I also would say to everyone, from every aspect of the movement, to keep in mind that at the end of the day, this is a political struggle. It is. Regardless of what method you're using, um, this is a political struggle, period. And I think that sometimes gets lost. And the ultimate aim of a political struggle is to change the law. Period. I mean, by definition, our movement is a political struggle that aims at the end of the day to change the law. Um, I'm personally a pacifist, and I have very strong values around that, and so that's the perspective I bring to this. But it's again, as I said earlier, to me, this is. I think what's interesting. Another thing we learned is as you're engaging in the political process and legislative process to change the law, um, it's not only the goal is not only to change the law, it's also the entire discussion that comes around that. So, saying, "Hey, I'm gonna, pass a bill to end greyhound racing in Massachusetts, where the legislature is really difficult and the industry is very powerful. And, at the beginning, that had no realistic chance of passage. But the struggle to get that done and all the organizing that happened around it and all the lobbying that happened around it and all in the media coverage and the interest and that itself became the stone soup. That became the single point that everyone could organize around and rally around that invited people in, and then later down the road, some other path became available. And so, it's this is not it's not a clear path. It really isn't. It's not, for me, the approach is you try to find ways to engage. You try to find ways to find, something to organize around, to rally around, to focus on, and then you invite something bigger than yourself to emerge. And when that happens, then, the path that may actually lead to success shows itself, and then you dedicate yourself to that and try to get it done. Um, so it's not, again, I don't know that I found it to be effective to come in and say, well, we're gonna, end Greyhound racing in this state, and we're gonna do it in exactly this way, and then try to like force that to happen. It's you know it's this is a much more organic process, in my opinion.
Well, I'll put it a little bit more simply. Carrie and I are a great example of the how people who are very different can work together to a common cause. Carrie was raised by a free living, hippie type woman on the West Coast. I was brought up in a very strict environment, very doctrinaire parents and very regimented upbringing. So I had this perspective on life, which was completely different than Carrie's. He's a poet, he's a chess master. I was a Jersey girl turned lawyer. I mean, we were just so different. And oftentimes, Carrie and I will disagree entirely on a strategy, but we agree on one thing, the goal. And then we find our way to come together towards that goal. So I think that's possible with anyone. And I know that might sound Pollyanna, but it's been our experience that when you show people there's a path and they share the goal, they will join with you and work with you. And sometimes, people fall off and say, well, this isn't for me. I don't have the heart for it. I tried and we lost that. I'm done. Carrie and I are not done. We're gonna keep fighting, because we really, really want to see the end of dog racing, and we can see it in our minds, and we know it's going to happen, and we have a bit more work to do here in the US and a lot of work to do around the world. A lot on our plates, and as we go from country to country, we're meeting new people, making new friends, and seeing again the dynamics of different perspectives on trying to solve the same problem, but everyone sharing the same goal. We
I
just had an event in London last week, where we had people come together from various countries for the release of our new report on dog racing in the United Kingdom. And some of these people would not normally even they would not speak to each other, they would not be in the same room, but they came together for this report and because they wanna push forward to end dog racing in the United Kingdom. So that was a great example of people coming together who might, not exactly be, sending each other Christmas cards each year.
I also think, I mean, movement solidarity is incredibly important, um, but it's also something that's out of your control. I mean, I do, my heart breaks in some ways at the current state of our movement in the United States. I mean, I think I think we have issues with movement solidarity in a lot of ways, and that has affected our work sometimes. But that's not something I can control. I mean, all I can do is, keep, pushing forward and uniting as many people as I can, again, having our work be an invitation for everyone to engage. And when others, choose to not engage, for one reason or another, it is what it is. You just have to keep moving forward and keep fighting.
And I think when you have different personalities within the same movement, when you can get over the disagreements, you can also see the same matter from different perspectives and try to cover more ends.
For sure. I mean, honestly, I think what bothers me more, this is this is another podcast episode entirely, and so we don't have time for it. But I'll just say briefly, what bothers me more is groups being territorial. Like I don't, I do think there's a sickness in our movement with groups being territorial, and I mean, I just think I think there are cases where the interests of the group are put ahead of the interests for the animals. And I think that's really unfortunate, and I think it sets our movement back. But again, that's not something I can control. I mean, I could sit here all day and be frustrated by, the the latest, cynical thing the Greyhound breeders are doing, or the some help we're not getting from parts of the movement or whatever, or I can just focus on the work and keep moving forward. I mean, at some point you just have to focus on what you can control, and trust that the rest of that will work itself out.
Hi there, I'm Hope Bohannick, host of the Hope for the Animals podcast, sponsored by Compassionate Living. Join me on a journey to uncover the heartbreaking and heartwarming aspects of living vegan. My guests cover a variety of issues, but I like to focus on ethics, chickens and sanctuaries, the environment, anti-oppression activism, and the reasons for living vegan. If this sounds good to you, come check out the Hope for the Animals podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts.
We haven't talked about the star of the show. We haven't talked about Brooklyn yet.
Right? Come on.
I want to bring him up a little bit because not only is like his name is in the title, his face is in the cover, and he became such a symbol for the fight against Greyhound racing. He was born in Australia. He was then shipped to a canidrome in Macau. And by the time he was born, GREY2K already successfully, my accent is all over the place today, ended Greyhound racing in Massachusetts. And then when you first learned about him, um, what moved you towards helping end this, um, his plight and the plight of all the other companions that he had in Macau? Was it maybe because you knew that it was already possible, or was it something else entirely?
So a board member of ours went to Macau, and this was very, very early, and took a series of photographs of the track. And the canidrome was a place of death. I mean, it was a very, to say it was a sad place. I mean, it was just a place that reeked of death. Um, those in the movement who've been to a place like this, and there are unfortunately many of them in the world. It never really leaves you. It's just you can smell the death and the sadness and the tragedy for the people, tragedy for the dogs. It was just it was an incredibly dark place. And she took a series of photographs, and at this time there was essentially no advocacy against the track. And at the same time, she also met with a local man named Albano, who became Albano Martin, who became an absolutely critical ally for us moving forward. But that's later in the story. So she came back and she showed us these photographs, and she told us about her visit there, which was bleak and depressing. And there was this one photo of this dog, and it was just this incredibly striking photo. I mean, he had this kind of pensive look on his face, and he so I said, to our director of research, tell me about this dog. Like, what can you find out about this dog? Can you identify the dog? Can you And all we knew was on his collar there were three letters visible, LYN. And so my director of research came back and said, "Well, I think this is a dog named Brooklyn." And it was so, so the idea became, could you build an entire campaign to shut down the track around this one dog? And and so we wrote to the track and said, let this be the first dog to live. adopt out this one dog. At a minimum, start an adoption program, have this one dog be the first dog. And that sort of became this, long struggle and negotiation with the track, with the government that lasted years and years and years. And we ended up, sort of making Brooklyn the poster child of this campaign. And we had like mock missing posters, which I think was very creative, and like actresses and and actors from around the world got involved. Bridget Bardot at one point spoke out, and um, there's actually a faith leader named the Supreme Master who is involved with the Loving Hut restaurants. At one point, she reached out to the track and offered them. Uh, it's quite a large sum of money to let Brooklyn go, and the track refused.
$10,000.
It just became, again, he became this focal point. And after all of these years of struggle, when Christine and Albano eventually convinced the government to close the track, and the track was, I mean, there was an organized crime connection for sure. So that there was some danger and some risk in this work. And when Albano went in and started looking at all the dogs, Brooklyn was there. And frankly, we couldn't believe it because we thought he was dead. I mean, he had been he essentially had sat in that cage for 10 years.
Wow.
That was incredibly powerful. And then, Christine, I'll let you pick up the story, but it was made even more incredible when he came home to us.
He was living just like all the rest of those dogs in a prison compound, in a concrete cell with no bedding, nothing, just a barren cell. And when he came home to us, he barely had any teeth because he'd been chewing on those bars for years. His skin was, peeling away. He was underweight. His coat was dull and dirty. He had wounds on him. He was in terrible condition, and honestly, we thought, "Well, we're gonna give this dog as much time as he's got, but it won't be much." You know, he was already an older dog, and it was amazing that he was still alive because at the canidrome, there was a system where if a dog did not place in top 3 in 5 races, that dog was killed. That was it was a system that they had in play. It was very methodical. And how we know this is because they kept their records right online. That's how we were able to identify Brooklyn by the name, and we linked it to the racing number and the description, and we knew this was Brooklyn. So there was no shame in this. They thought this was just a business, you know. Sure, 400 dogs are killed a year. That's just part of the business. Um, well, Brooklyn, um, was, I believe, kept alive because of our campaign. It was called originally the Rescue Brooklyn campaign, and as Carey said, our main focus was at first to give this track the opportunity to at least release one dog, and then have an adoption program. Don't just kill the dogs when they're no longer useful to you. But the track refused, and the track just thought it had the upper hand, but years and years of advocacy. I mean, those posters that we had with Brooklyn, they were real posters. The kids hung them up all around the world. They weren't just digital and people's on Facebook or something. People hung them up, and people were telling other people about Brooklyn. I mean, it was amazing. I think he's probably the most famous, Greyhound in the world right now. And people really wanted to save him, just like we wanted to save him, because when we saw that picture taken by our board member, his eyes just went right into my heart. And I said to Carey, "We have to close this dog track. We have to save this dog." And Carey, he looked at me, he said, "Come on, Christine, how are we going to do that from a one-room basement office in Somerville, Massachusetts?" I said, "I don't know, but we are." So little by little, making the right connections, Charmaine talking to Albano, who was running the only independent animal shelter on Macau, and who didn't know anything about the dog track. It wasn't even on his radar screen. He had his hands full. But when we came to him and told him the numbers, what was happening to the dogs, he said, "I will help you." And that was the alliance that was needed to really bring change, in Macau. And when we were able to airlift the 532 surviving dogs, including Brooklyn, it was a miracle, and it showed the world that it is possible to close a dog track and save the dogs, and it was proof of concept, and to have Brooklyn come home to us was the most wonderful thing, really. The 3 years that we had with him were such glorious years, and they weren't easy years because about a month after he came to us, he was diagnosed with cancer, and we had to have his leg amputated. Um, and for most dogs, that might give them a few more months. He lasted 2 more years. He was such a powerhouse dog. He had such energy and such verve, and everyone who met him just he mesmerized people. Like, I know people say, "Oh, my dog is special." There was something really unique about this dog, and his fur was soft as a bunny, and his heart was so kind, and he just he greeted every day with all that it offered, and he taught us that lesson to appreciate every moment. And if I didn't know it before after my accident, I certainly knew it then.
And you were the family then that adopted Brooklyn and brought him home. Did he had to overcome any traumas from his early life, or were 3 peaceful years?
He clearly had been scarred. I mean, there's no question about that. But like Christine said, he was. I mean, look, we've had a lot of dogs and a lot of cats, and we love them all, and they're all special. Every single one of them. They all mean the world to me. But there was something different about Brooklyn. I don't know if it's because of the deprivation that he suffered. um, your readers can read the story and draw their own conclusions.
He
But
was magical. That's all there is to it.
he was a showstopper. I mean, we'd bring him into work, and people would literally stop and spend time with him, and you could see that he had just completely changed their day. I mean, it was something really, really, really magical. He was a very special dog. There's no question about that. It was an honor to take care of him. It really was. And uh, after this cancer diagnosis, he had what's called an FCE, a type of spinal stroke, which some dogs have, and so he became much less mobile, but he was still very happy, still very. And I essentially became his legs, and so I was tied to that dog for 2 years. I didn't go anywhere. I had to be with him all the time, literally. And um, and we were caretakers for him. And there was times when that was challenging. And I admit, there are times when I would get frustrated or get, like resentful, like why am I taking care of the dog again, month after month. But when it was all over, I realized that that had been an incredible gift to me because it made me be completely selfless. And in some ways, I had been a selfish person. I mean, I had not been the best version of myself, and so I think having to take care of him was an honor and incredible gift, and it changed me. So, um, and I've sensed that I've come across people who are taking care of loved ones, or you know not to say I can relate to them completely, of course, but, I can relate a little bit, because I do think that you know, it's a gift to be able to take care of others in that way and to be called to take care of others in that way. Um, and to come back to Tom Gray, I know we're running long, but to come back to Tom Gray for a moment, he's someone who has throughout his life, he had a congregation he was taking care of. He was a commander in Vietnam, and he had a group of soldiers he had to take care of, and obviously incredibly challenging, difficult situation. He then spent years taking care of his father, and who was very elderly, and he's now taking care of his wife, and he had this national movement of people who are being harmed by gambling who he took care of. And I look at that and I say, in a certain sense, I think he was given all of that because he was ready for it. And it was a gift for him to be asked to be a caretaker like that again and again. So I certainly don't have that capacity, but yeah, Brooklyn was just he was everything to us.
I think most of all, his resilience taught us a great lesson or reminded us of a lesson we knew but needed to be reminded of, that when, life brings challenges and you just keep pushing forward, and he did that. And he was just such a great living example of hope for me and everyone who met him. And we have a memorial page online with hundreds and hundreds of testimonials of people who were touched by him, most of whom never met him. And it's amazing the influence he had on people's minds and hearts.
Not only on the memorial page, not only for folks who actually had the pleasure of meeting him, but also now through the book for many readers out there. How important it is that this book reaches more readers. And I wonder, what are your dreams for this book's future?
So when we sat down and started to write the book, I said to Christine, I think the animal movement's moment will come. And by that I mean we saw the Me Too movement have, not to say all issues are resolved, but you will see occasionally movements sort of have their moment in society. And as much as we've accomplished as a movement for the animals, I don't think we've had our moment yet, and I think we will. I think it will come. And when it comes, I think we can't imagine the changes that are possible in terms of you know all of the various cruelties and abuses that are happening. I think truly as a movement our best days are ahead of us. But when that moment comes, I want the people who are there in that place to know the history of the Greyhound fight. I wrote the book for them. And so we went with Lantern. My only choice was Lantern. We didn't go to any other publisher because the Lantern to me has been the publishing house for the animal movement, and really has been a caretaker in so many ways of all of these important voices and all of these important stories. And I want the book to survive long enough that even if it's, obscure, even if it's, I want the book to survive long enough that whether it's 20 years in the future, 50 years in the future, whatever, that the people who are there when the big moment happens know about this Greyhound fight, because I think there are lessons to learn from it. I mean, I think there are mistakes that we made, and things that we figured out, um and so I want Brooklyn's story and the story of all these people who fought for these dogs against great odds and won to be available to those future activists. So that's who I wrote the book for.
I can't add to that.
Well, then I'll add a question on top of that. Those are the dreams for the book. And what about GREY2K USA Worldwide? What are the dreams and plans for the next few years of the organization?
I mean, ideally to not exist, but I think we're on the verge of winning in the United States completely. The last I think one thing we're learning is, at the very end, closing out an animal abuse industry is difficult. And so, it is resistant to change. But I think we will win in the U.S. completely, and we are pivoting to the international fights. Um, we're doing a lot of work in the United Kingdom where there's a lot of greyhound abuse happening. Ireland is a very significant problem. And in Ireland, the industry is very closely tied to politicians, so that's a big challenge. And Australia, I think ultimately the future of the greyhound fight is the fight in Australia, and there are amazing advocates there working on the ground, and we're trying to be a good partner to them and good ally. But I do think this greyhound debate is one of the defining fights of our movement at this time, and is a path to where we want to go as a broader movement. So.
I would hope that people who are looking to take on, you know, animal cruelty industries and don't think there's a path, I would encourage them to think as we did and work incrementally and listen to their own intuition. I mean, there were lots of people who told us from day one, well, you'll never win. You don't know what you're doing. Other people said, oh, listen, dog racing, that's no big deal. It's just going to take care of itself. You're wasting your time. Still other people said, no, this is too hard. You'll never take on this multi-million-dollar industry in the state of Massachusetts. But, we just didn't listen to those voices. We listened to our own intuition and our own belief, and we stayed on the field as Tom Gray told us to do, and we just kept fighting, and we kept having to endure some failures, but through those failures, we found some success. And I think that success can show the movement overall that change can happen. And it may not even happen the way you think it will, but it will happen. And one change leads to another. And not just with us, with now Greyhound advocacy and fighting to end dog racing around the world being a really vibrant campaign right now in all the countries where dog racing exists. But the greyhounds are ambassadors, and they show that other animals can be helped through the political process. You just have to, you know, as I say, stay where you are know you're needed, which we knew it was the dogs. We knew we needed to work for the dogs and just stay focused on the mission and find the best strategy. And just don't listen to all the white noise in the background, the people who tell you can't do it, because maybe you can,
Mhm.
and maybe you should.
That is beautiful. Thank you. Very inspirational. As we're approaching the end of our podcast, I want to open the floor a little bit for you to share with our listeners if there's any projects or any links you would like me to add here in bio. I know sometimes the movements need like some signatures here or there. So if there's anything that you would like to share and advertise to our listeners, the floor is all yours. Just keep in mind that this episode is probably come out in June and we're recording now late April. So projects more long term.
Well, that's easy. If you just go on our website at GREY2KUSA.org and sign up for alerts, I mean, it's constantly changing. So right now, our focus is on the United Kingdom with our new report, but we're going to turn back to Australia, and unfortunately, I'm engaged in trying to keep dog racing out of the country of Vietnam. So different campaigns pop up and take on, the focus. So if someone signs up for alerts from the website, they can get those alerts and help sign a petition, share the information, call their lawmaker, depending on what jurisdiction they're in. There's always a way to help. You could donate. It's just we're a grassroots organization, and we appreciate anything anybody can do to support our mission.
Amazing. I know we have some listeners in the UK according to the analytics that the streaming platforms gave us, and we have some folks in Australia as well. So
Wonderful.
if your listeners are out there hearing this episode, then please head over to the episode description, check out the links.
Well, we particularly want Australians to listen because Australia is in the place that we were when we started. There are 49 dog tracks in Australia, which is the number that we had when we started in 2001. So many think that's impossible. Oh, you can't take on 49 dog tracks. Well, apparently you can because we've just got 2 left in the US. So we want to be a model and we want to be a partner with all of our Australian allies and work state by state to end dog racing. And right now there are really vibrant campaigns in 2 of those states in particular that we're involved in. So Australians, have heart, let's work together, and let's get the job done.
Precisely. Well, Carey, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I don't think so. I'm grateful again for the time today and for everything that Lantern does. We're proud to be a part of the Lantern family.
Well, we're proud to have you as well, and thank you for choosing us. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for this conversation. It was amazing. And once the episode comes out, I will definitely share it with both of you. We'll share on all social media. And
Fantastic, as will we.
thank you. And for the listeners, you heard the pitch. Head over to the episode description, hit the links, and sign up for. Is it a newsletter? Is it just the alerts?
Uh, you can sign up for the alerts, and if you like, you can get a newsletter as well in the mail. It's whatever you'd like.
Amazing, amazing. Well, listeners, you know what to do. Thank you, Carey. Thank you, Christine, for your time.
Thanks for
Take
having
care.
us. We really enjoyed it.
This was our conversation with Carey and Christine, authors of the book Brooklyn Go Home and the main responsibles for GREY2KUSA Worldwide organization. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and as promised, here is our special discount coupon that you can use to buy the ebook, okay? A digital book of Brooklyn Goes Home at our ebook store. The coupon is Lantern Voices 25. It's Lantern Voices, like the podcast name, all together. Don't put any spaces in there. And the numbers 2 and 5. If you head over to lanternpm.org, you're going to see on the top menu over there, ebooks, our ebook store. Just hit that button, and on the menu on the left-hand side, you will see featured in our podcast, Brooklyn Goes Home, last month's Subhuman, March's episode, The Red Planet, every single book ever featured here on an episode of Lantern Voices will be there as a discounted book. So you hit as many books as you want from that little list over there, head over to checkout, and on checkout, you'll see a little field where you can type Lantern Voices 25 all together, no spaces, and that will give you 25% off your purchase of eligible items, meaning books featured here in the podcast. And if you stayed with us until the very end, please don't forget to follow us on Instagram. We are at LanternPM over there. Follow us also on the other social media. There is right here on the episode description. And if you'd like to see these episodes in video format, we're still bad at testing some things. But if you head over to our YouTube channel, Lantern Publishing and Media, you will see all the episodes on video as well. Hopefully, we'll be able to get that going on Spotify real soon. Thank you once more for joining us here today, and stay tuned for next month's episode. We have some nice guests coming up for the rest of the year and for the remaining of our season 2. At the time that you're listening to this episode, we probably already have everybody booked for the year. So fingers crossed. I am working the final bookings right now. So hopefully we'll have the entire calendar. And that's another reason for you to check our ebook store, because usually whenever we finish recording an episode, the book is already available as a discounted book on our ebook store. So if you want some spoilers of what's coming up, head over to lanternpm.org and hit our ebook store, check featured in the podcast, and you can see what's coming up. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to us here, Lantern Voices, and I'll talk to you again next month. Goodbye.